In the photography world, I've noticed a bit of a trend. People want fast lenses. It's seen as a rite of passage for some, marking some kind of transition into real photography. And I can see why this is the case too. Almost every professional wedding shoot or portrait shot features insane amounts of bokeh where the subject pops off the frame. Photos tend to look more professional if only one thing is in focus. But here, I both want to challenge the assumption of professionalism associated with fast lenses, and also show off how good a cheap fast lens can be. So first off, what is a fast lens in the first place? Well, if you're already into the photography world, you know the answer to this, but a fast lens just has a very large maximum aperture to let in a lot of light to the sensor. Because you have more light hitting your image sensor, you can use a faster shutter speed when shooting, hence the fast term, thereby reducing motion blur and increasing clarity, especially because your ISO doesn't need to be so high to get the same exposure. A side effect of a large aperture though is that it has a thin focal plane. This reduces the usable plane where things could be expected to be in focus. Consequently, the background and foreground experience significant blurring, forming strong bokeh, and this is the primary reason why fast lenses are so desirable in the first place. A fast lens is basically anything with an f-stop below 3. A lower f-stop basically just means the aperture is bigger and lets in more light and increases bokeh. For this video, I want to demonstrate my two fast lenses, the 7 Artisans 25mm 1.8 and the Bokeh 35mm 1.4. The 7 Artisans 25mm 1.8 is easily my favorite out of the two. It's versatile and surprisingly good glass for its size and price. It's versatile because this lens is mainly meant for micro four thirds cameras, but the mount can be changed out easily to fit APS-C bodies like my Canon M6 Mark II. On micro four thirds, it's equivalent to 50mm, which is a nice average focal length, ideal for portraits and casual street shooting. On APS-C, however, this is equivalent to 40mm, which is closer to a regular wide-angle lens. This is really nice for street photography and nature photography, especially since it can macro relatively close. If you flip the camera on its side, you can capture full bodies and generally the whole scene in front of you. The corners do vignette wide open, but it only really adds to the character of this lens. The bokeh is nice and swirly, and the pictures taken with it have a psychedelic look, similar to anamorphic lenses. The most shocking thing about this lens though is that it's amazingly sharp even wide open. Even on a 32 megapixel sensor, everything in the center is razor sharp. You could probably shoot part of a movie with this lens and nobody would notice. The declicked, smooth aperture ring only makes that easier. The second lens is the Bokeh 35mm 1.4. The first thing I noticed about this lens when I picked it up was the build quality. It's shockingly good for a budget lens, with completely metal chassis, a dense weight, and extremely well-fitting components. I also love the way this lens looks on my camera. The front element is bigger, really showing off the gigantic 1.4 max aperture it has. The focus ring has some incredibly nice feeling grips engraved on the side, which interrupt the otherwise completely circular shape. The only criticism I have is that the aperture ring isn't dampened nearly enough. It is declicked, but it's easy to accidentally adjust. The downside to this lens is that it's not very good optically speaking. The lens suffers from massive blooming and fringing wide open, and details are hardly sharp. You really wouldn't want to use this lens for dedicated nature photography or professional portraits. However, when you get into video, this lens looks a lot more attractive than the 7 Artisans option. This lens is amazing when paired with my Canon EOS M, which suffers from poor high ISO performance. Since I mostly shoot 1080p with that camera anyways, it's sharp enough for that, but it still offers that cinematic, shallow depth of field look. And if you haven't noticed by now, one of my favorite things to do with these photos is crop them into a cinematic aspect ratio. The look is cinematic, and the background separation is unmatchable by kit lenses your camera probably came with. That is with one exception though. The Canon 50mm 1.8 is a famous lens for being cheap and fast. Many Canon DSLRs used to come with it. Unfortunately, I don't own one, but it is no brainer if you want a good portrait lens on the cheap. There are some things I should say about fast lenses though. One is that they won't automatically make your photos objectively better somehow or make you a better photographer. These lenses produce a really cool look, but none of that matters if your composition sucks or you don't know how to use your camera. Also, I need to stress that you shouldn't just shoot wide open all the time for no reason. If your scene doesn't call for strong background separation, all you'll end up with is a confusing, soft picture, and that's part of the reason why this photo looks so bad. I really didn't need to be shooting at 1.4 to capture the scene effectively. My first lens taught me a lot I wouldn't have learned otherwise if I was just handed these lenses and told to go off. I learned a few very important things. One is that simply shooting telephoto is a great way of getting bokeh no matter what lens you have. Some of my favorite images were shot on my 18 to 55mm lens at f3.5, which is considered pretty slow. Secondly, if you can't focus effectively, your lens won't help you out at all. If you're unable to judge where the focal plane is when you're shooting fast pictures, you might as well stop it down to help yourself out. The third one applies especially to filmmaking. You really shouldn't rely on a shallow depth of field to hide the imperfections of your set because you have it. The goal of movies is to tell a story, and even the focal plane manages how that's done. A good example of this is the 2019 movie Joker. In that movie, we're focused on one character, and the movie uses a lot of shallow depth of field because we're focused just on him and not necessarily on the entire world around him. We're sort of trapped inside of his mind, and the thin focal plane that only features him in most of the shots really emphasizes that. But for example, in a movie series like Pirates of the Caribbean, you see shallow depth of field hardly used. That's because this movie is about an expansive world on the seas. Shallow depth of field would make it confusing to know what exactly you're supposed to be looking at, especially since you have huge ships and huge oceans and lots of characters that have interlapping storylines. And I'm not some video essayist honestly, but those are some important factors to keep in mind when shooting pictures. The primary reason I like these kinds of lenses so much is because they produce a unique look. And you have to admit, as much as people throw around the word cinematic, these pictures look objectively cinematic. It's the magic that they have over fast lenses. The other reason I love this glass is because of its price. I got my 7 Artisans for $40 and the Bokeh for $55. Although I will warn you, for some reason the price skyrocketed after I bought them. But you're still getting some relatively nice glass for under $200, which is a good deal. Companies like the ones I mentioned make great budget glass that can get you started with the Bokelicious photography world. Just don't take it too seriously, and recognize the purpose of your photography. And with that, this is Calc G, out.